Nate Diaz has been one of the UFC's biggest fan favorites for the best part of a decade. Along with his brother Nick, Nate has always served as one of the sport's most revered anti-authority figures, clashing with the UFC brass whenever the opportunity presented itself. Diaz has carved out a reputation as one of the most game fighters in MMA today. So with him set up to return to the octagon to face off against welterweight contender Leon Edwards, we're going to take a look at how some of Nate's biggest rivals and contemporaries view him. This is what UFC fighters really think of Nate Diaz. Number 10. Tony Ferguson. To kick things off, we're going to take a look at Nate's fellow UFC 262 main card fighter Tony Ferguson, who faces Beneil Dariush just shy of the co-main event slot. When asked for his opinion on Nate and his placement on the same card as him, Tony was quite dismissive.
I think that there's exciting fights in the division. We all know who really sold the card out. You don't have to name names, but it definitely wasn't Nate's punk ass.
Despite Diaz's clear drawing power, Ferguson was adamant that it was him, and not Nate, who served as a main attraction for the fans. And though Ferguson has been hostile to Diaz in the past, up until this point, the pair have yet to find their way into an octagon together. Will that change in the future? It's hard to know, given both men's career trajectories, but it's pretty clear that there is some bad blood between them. Number 9. Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier had a rather messy negotiational process with Nate Diaz a few years ago, after the pair were signed to fight at UFC 230. In the end, the process of getting Nate to agree to a contract took too long for Dustin's liking, something that caused him to promptly withdraw from the contest there and then. Nate, being Nate, wasn't overly happy with Poirier, the UFC, or anyone really afterwards. And though the pair went their separate ways, with Nate picking up a huge win over Anthony Pettis instead, Poirier still seems interested in finally getting that matchup. Upon TKOing Conor McGregor in the second round of their showdown at UFC 257, Poirier took some questions from the media, content in the knowledge that he had just elevated his stock to new levels. And when he was asked about his plans for the future, he cited Nate Diaz as a fighter he would enjoy beating the brakes off.
Does interest you?
I mean, a rematch with Conor interests me. Always wanted to whip Nate Diaz's ass. That interests me.
With Diaz plying his trade at 170 pounds and Dustin angling towards the lightweight title, it's hard to know if that matchup will ever come to pass, but if it did, it would no doubt stand as one of the biggest fights of the year in question. Number 8. Kamaru Usman. The welterweight champion of the world, Kamaru Usman, secured his spot as the UFC's pound-for-pound king after a stunning second-round KO of Jorge Masvidal this month. And while the idea of him taking on Nate Diaz doesn't seem overly realistic right now, with the Stockton native set to fight Leon Edwards next month, a win there for Diaz would likely put him in a prime position to earn a shot at the belt. And as far as Kamaru is concerned, he would welcome Nate, or Nick Diaz for that matter, if they did decide to sign on the dotted line and fight him.
If Nick wants to get in here and deal with this African lion, more power to him.
Now, of course, most fans wouldn't give either man a hope in hell against the Nigerian nightmare, but as far as a big-name spectacle goes, Usman really couldn't hope for anything better than either of these two octagon legends. Number 7. Colby Covington. It is truly difficult to get Colby Covington to say something nice about anyone, and in the case of Nate Diaz, to say that Colby didn't hold back would be an understatement. When asked for his opinion on the BMF title contested between Nate and Jorge Masvidal, Covington attacked both men and their pro records, calling them journeymen and wondering out loud why anyone should care about a belt that two mid-level fighters are striving to win.
And that's that. They're both 50-50 in the last couple years. What's Nate Diaz, 1-1 the last 3 years? How does that make you a BMF?
Love him or hate him, Colby certainly has a point. Sure, both Nate and Jorge are big stars, but one look at their contemporaries within the 170-pound division will be enough to tell you that they weren't the most deserving fighters of such a unique honor. But hey, they sell tickets, and that's how the fight game works, I suppose. Though Covington has yet to share the octagon with either man, chances are we will finally see him take on Jorge Masvidal at some point within the next year or two, given their very public and bitter feud. Number 6. Jorge Masvidal. As the man who defeated Nate to take home the inaugural BMF title, Jorge Masvidal has spent enough time inside the octagon with Diaz to be able to give a good take on his overall fighting style. And in the wake of his doctor's stoppage TKO victory, Jorge had nothing but nice things to say about his rival, calling him a dog in there that you literally have to kill to put away.
Nate's a fucking dog though. Because those same shots I've hit a lot of people, I pulled him like a long chair. You literally got to kill that dude. I said in every interview, when it wasn't a line, man, you got to kill that dude.
Masvidal mirrored the opinions of many of Nate's other past opponents, telling the world about his remarkable ability to take a shot and continue moving forward. As a fighter who has grown into his role as a knockout artist with each passing fight, the fact that Masvidal couldn't put Nate away once again only serves to further the infamy that surrounds Nate's granite chin. Number 5. Justin Gaethje. As a fighter who many point to as a terrible stylistic matchup for Nate due to his excellent use of leg kicks, Justin Gaethje seems to have little to no respect for Diaz, despite them both holding a very fan-friendly fighting style. When asked about his opinion on Nate, the highlight fired back, telling the world that he didn't buy into Nate's gimmick and that he has very little respect for him as a fighter.
Nate Diaz keeps talking so much shit, but the dude won't fight. It just amazes me how people think he's still a gangster whenever you can't talk and not show up. So that shit's funny to me, but
Gaethje has never been a man to mince his words, and though he is still licking his wounds after losing by way of second-round submission to the former lightweight king Khabib Nurmagomedov, chances are if we do ever see a matchup between Gaethje and Diaz, Justin will be quite confident that he can chop the legs of the Renzo Gracie black belt down with little issue. Number 4. Donald Cerrone. Once upon a time, the rivalry between Nate Diaz and Donald Cerrone was among the most riveting in the sport of mixed martial arts. The pair traded verbal barbs consistently before eventually signing to fight in 2011. And though Diaz won comfortably after a huge active performance on the feet, the bad blood between both parties did not stop there and then. However, some years later, Cowboy revealed that he had, in fact, made peace with Nate, approaching him and his brother Nick backstage at a UFC event to settle the beef.
Went up and talked to Nate and Nick, both of them. And I said, hey man, this shit's gotta stop. Like, we either gotta figure it out or figure it out, you know what I mean? And they were like, cool man, you know, I said every time we see each other, it's like, I don't wanna mug you across the room all the time. Like, I'm tired of that shit. Like, us always have, so let's be cool.
After years of mean-mugging and palpable tension, it appears as though the long feud between these two Octagon legends has finally been put to bed. Whether they'll ever fight again or not is unclear, although it's probably very unlikely. But for Cerrone, he seemed genuinely happy to put this rivalry to bed. Number 3. Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping is a man who is never overly afraid to speak his mind. As a longtime veteran of the sport and a former middleweight champion asked about Nate's decision to break the mold and take on the top welterweight contender Leon Edwards for his return, Bisping, who can count Edwards as his fellow Englishman, gave high praise to Diaz for the decision, citing Leon as an incredibly tough opponent, despite having little in the way of star power. Bisping gave Nate credit for attempting to earn a spot within the UFC welterweight title picture the hard way.
No, I totally agree. And I will say respect to Nate Diaz, because as you say, he is a gigantic star and he can kind of pick and choose. Most
people don't give Nate much of a shot at defending the in-form Edwards. But all in all, it should make for a hugely fascinating fight. Number 2. Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor's rivalry with Nate Diaz came about as the result of pure chance, as the former lightweight king Rafael dos Anjos pulled out of his originally scheduled clash with the Irishman at UFC 196 due to injury. From there, Nate stepped in on 10 days' notice, going on to shock the world by submitting the featherweight champion in the second round. And though Conor managed to get him back at UFC 202, the two have yet to round out their trilogy with one final bout. When asked about Nate as an opponent, Conor is never too afraid to give the Stockton-born brawler praise, calling him a ridiculously hard man to put away. And over the course of 5 rounds in their rematch, Diaz's ability to absorb shots was truly something to behold.
But boy, is he one tough motherfucker. He keeps on walking forward. He took every shot. I dropped him multiple times. He just keeps coming. His face was bust open, and he's still coming forward.
Though already known for his toughness, that performance in particular elevated the legend of his chin to new levels entirely. All that remains is for both men to sign on the dotted line and give the fans one last showdown. Number 1. Khabib Nurmagomedov. The former UFC champion Khabib Nurmagomedov once had the pleasure of getting on Nate's bad side before, as the pair attended a World Series of Fighting event in support of their teammates. The opposing groups clashed in a rather unsightly brawl, that stole away many of the MMA headlines the following day. In the time since, Nate has taken every possible opportunity to bring up the fact that he slapped Khabib during this skirmish. And as you would expect, Nurmagomedov has always held Nate's merits as a fighter in low regard, telling the media that a fighter with as many pro losses as him doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as him. And although the pair will likely never fight inside the UFC octagon, it's clear that their bad blood is showing no signs of tapering off.
What are you talking about, Nate Diaz? How many times he lose in UFC? 11 times.
No, I'm just asking. I wanted to ask you.
He lose 11 times and you talk about Nate Diaz?
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button before subscribing to the channel, so you can stay up to date with all our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.